Ahoy! Welcome to an adventure. I am Anthony Wright Day Hernandez, aka Rogan27, and this is Archival Adventures, a once a week, roughly, stream where we look at things from the special collections and university archives at Virginia Tech and see what we can learn. How is everybody today? Let me see who's here. Hi, Sayuri. Hi, Hannah. Key squared. The Jovian Moons. Yes, they are quite jovial. So some of you have definitely found a hint as to what we are doing today. Today we're gonna have the penultimate item from the list of science fiction classics that was put together by Sam Moskowitz. I think. Stanley. No. I don't. My brain. Moskowitz. I'm trying to... Sam. Yes, Sam Moskowitz. Thank you. So... a list he submitted to the initial issue of Comet, a pulp sci-fi magazine, in 1940, if I'm remembering the dates correctly, listing a bunch of works that he called classics of science fiction. Now, he was a sci-fi critic, and despite the fact that the works were all less than 10 years old, they definitely have been generally living up to the idea that they are classics. I don't remember. See, now I am questioning myself on when yeah, 1940. Okay, yeah. Anyway, we're up to 1935. So the story we're going to look at today, less than 5 years old when he deemed it a classic. It is the third story in a row from author Stanley Weinbaum. And it is, as I said, the penultimate item on the list. It is item number 18 out of 19. So let us just refresh our memories on who is this Weinbaum character. Stanley G. Weinbaum. Born 1902, died 1935. Author, early interest in science fiction. He published The Lost Battle in a school magazine, The Mercury, in December 1917, forecasting World War I. Let's see. Went to the University of Wisconsin, some chemical engineering learned there. Anyway, we've read a number of his things. If you want to delve more into, like, who the heck is this guy? The previous streams have some stuff. Today, we're specifically going to be looking at his work, The Mad Moon. I do not know a whole lot. I don't want to read the plot summary that's on here, but first published December 1935 in Astounding Stories. It is another of his works emphasizing alien ecologies. It was the only Weinbaum story set on Io. And of course, this is a fictional Io. I believe he is the author who we encountered a fictional Pluto. But yeah, so in Weinbaum's solar system, Jupiter radiates enough heat to create Earth-like environments on the Galilean moons. If you're unfamiliar, the term Galilean moons, they're the 4 largest moons of Jupiter. Ganymede, Callisto, Io, and Europa. And that's what they're called. We could dig into why, but it's best just to know that that's what they're called. Unless you want me to dig into it, and I will. Io, the innermost Galilean satellite, has a tropical climate, so that 2 human settlements are located at the poles. Junopolis in the north and Heropolis in the south. Herapolis. Okay. Does anybody see the oddity of those 2 names? I do. Hi, Stephen Joyce. Oh yeah, you knew. So one is named after Juno and the other is named after Hera. Juno and Hera are basically equivalent, right? They are both the main goddess in Roman and Greek mythology. So they're roughly equivalent. The thing that I think is kind of odd, Juno is the queen of the gods in Roman mythology. Hera is the queen of the gods in Greek mythology. The oddity here is the suffix. Junopolis and Herapolis, or Herapolis. Polis is a Greek suffix. So the Roman Junopolis is combining the Roman goddess name with the Greek suffix. Which is not uncommon. It's not surprising that would be the thing that happened, but it's if a Roman got transported to now, they might feel bad about having their goddess's name Greekified. I know Romanized, but what would the equivalent term be for making something Greek? Anyway, sorry, I digress. Hellenized! Yes, thank you, Q squared. That is exactly it. That is the word I needed. Extending partway around the equator are the Idiot's Hills, whose peaks extend beyond Io's dense but shallow atmosphere. Weinbaum was ignorant that Io is tidally locked and therefore showed Jupiter rise and set during the story. Again, this is 1935. They knew Io existed, but they didn't know pretty much anything about it. So it was science fiction, imagining hey, what would it be like if that's an Earth-like climate and people were to go and live there? So he creates it as a tropical world, decides that he just makes stuff up, which is fine because it's fiction. I think it's interesting that the atmosphere is shallow enough that the Idiot's Hills are high enough they extend past the atmosphere. 2 intelligent races are native to Io, native alien life. The Loonies, a humanoid race of only moderate intelligence, with large balloon-like heads upon long, slim necks, and rodentine, warlike slinkers. I'm assuming Loonies is derived from the fact that they look like balloons? The Canadians took over Io. I mean, their $1 Canadian coins are called loonies, and their $2 Canadian coins are called toonies. So the Slinkers are members of the Harrison expedition to Mars. Oh, wait, no, they're not. Members of the Harrison expedition to Mars encounter a Slinker in the story Valley of Dreams. So pulling in another of his stories. Another native is the parcat, a feline-like animal with a single hind leg and the ability to mimic phrases of human conversation. Ionian flora includes furva leaves, used by pharmaceutical companies on Earth to create alkaloids, bleeding grass, which exudes a red sap, and stinging palms, named for venomous barbs. Of course, alkaloids are a broad class of naturally occurring organic compounds that contain at least one nitrogen atom. Anyway, we will dive in and take a look at the story and see, once again, does this stand up to the description classic? Yeah. Hi, Bast Insider. So here we have Astounding Stories for December 1935. Once again, this is actually the second story from this that we will be looking at. Last month's was also in this same issue. Actually, no, sorry. Not last month's. Next month's is also in this issue, but by a different author. Alright, page 52, The Mad Moon. The blurb. I love that they have little short descriptive blurbs in the table of contents. I think that's really neat. And it basically just gives you like, hey, am I interested in reading this one? The fever was coming on. He felt it. Illusions would come and temporary madness. The loonies chuckled as he plodded on, and then he saw her. An illusion. So, we'll see. Okay, let's see. 52. This one's actually not in terrible condition. This one's much better condition than some of the other months have been. We'll zoom out so you all can see the complete art, because once again, Elliot Dold has made spectacular art for the story. I really like Dold's work. Congratulations, Key Squared! You've been randomly selected as VIP for the stream. Enjoy your digital gemstone and the ability to create or control the pun points. I know what I'm saying. So we've got a combined picture here. Get out! Beat it! Scram! He shouted at the giggling, gibbering creatures. The great, idiotic heads, the silly grins and giggles, those infernal giggles, would drive him crazy. Unlike a lot of spec fiction art, like pulp magazine art, by the time, or I don't know, because this is still kind of not super late in pulp sci-fi, but at this point, at least in this magazine, the art is actually reflective of the content of the story. If we were to jump back, like, say, 20, 25 years before this, in pulps, there's just sci-fi / fantasy art based on the title alone. And so, like, the artist just made work, but had no idea what the content of the story was. And so the art that's paired with the story often has no correlation, like nothing to do with it. This, however, this art is inspired by the story. I find it interesting to see a log cabin in a jungle environment. But those would be these would be the loonies. And I'm assuming this is a parcat. It's interesting that the Wikipedia description mentions that it has one hind leg, but doesn't mention that it has a bird's beak. The artist style also reminds you of some of the Oz books. Yeah, I really love Elliot Dould's work. It's one of my favorite. And we've gotten to see a lot of it, because basically every story we've looked at in this entire series was illustrated by him. All right. The Mad Moon by Stanley G. Weinbaum. Idiots! Howled Grant Calthorpe. Fools! Nitwits! Imbeciles! Yeah. Parrot cat. But in the description, it doesn't mention the beak. I learned today that Nancy Drew was first published in 1930. I know! I had hoped... Sorry, now I'm going to digress slightly. That's one of the things I looked at as a potential stream, because there was something like an anniversary-ish thing related to Nancy Drew that was coming up, and I was like, oh, I should look and see, do we have any? We have no Nancy Drew in our collection. And the fact that we used to collect British and American literature, I was kind of disappointed that we didn't have Nancy Drew. I consider it literature, but apparently not. But Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, they're definitely classics at this point. And they're roughly contemporaneous. I don't remember exactly when the Hardy Boys got started. It's okay, we're learning. They debuted in 1927. Yeah, we don't have any Nancy Drew. I mean, in special collections. Like, the library has stuff about Nancy Drew. I don't know that they have any actual of the Nancy Drew books. Ooh, there are 5 hits on the Hardy Boys in special collections, but not because we actually have Hardy Boys. They're just hitting off of the word Hardy. Yeah, I mean, our focus in collecting literature was British and American classical literature, so it's not terribly surprising that we don't have these, because these would have been popular fiction, not classic. But today, I would call them classics. Anyway, I'm going to actually 5 hits on Hardy, but none on Stratemeyer? Were you looking at our... I've got 1 hit on Stratemeyer. Edward Stratemeyer, An Undivided Union, published in 1899. No, I don't mind tangents. It's just... I eventually have to pull it back around. Oh, you read all of them, and your niece and nephew are now reading them? They are good. I think they're probably the reason why I ended up loving the Scooby-Doo cartoon. Although my favorites of the Scooby-Doo cartoons were when they had guest stars like Mama Cass or the Globetrotters. Count of Monte Cristo was popular fiction, and we do have that. Also, I'm sure the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew are why I, at one point, was super into Lillian Jackson Braun's The Cat Who detective books, where the detective was the cat. They were, I enjoyed them quite a bit. Anyway, I'm going to bring us back and actually read more than half a paragraph. All right. Idiots, howled Grant Calthorpe. Fools, nitwits, Imbeciles. He sought wildly for some more expressive terms, failed, and vented his exasperation in a vicious kick at the pile of rubbish on the ground. Too vicious a kick, in fact. He had already forgotten the 1/3 normal gravitation of Io, and his whole body followed his kick in a long, 12-foot arc. As he struck the ground, the 4 loonies giggled, their great idiotic heads looking like nothing so much as the comic faces painted on Sunday balloons for children, swayed in unison on their 5-foot necks as thin as Grant's wrist. "Get out!" he blazed, scrambling erect. "Beat it! Skidoo! Scram! No chocolate, no candy, not until you learn that I want furva leaves, and not any junk you happen to grab. Clear out!" The loonies, Lunae Jovis Magnicapites, or literally big heads of Jupiter's moon, backed away, giggling plaintively. Beyond doubt, they considered Grant fully as idiotic as he considered them, and were quite unable to understand the reasons for his anger. But they certainly realized that no candy was to be forthcoming, and their giggles took on a note of keen disappointment. So keen, indeed, that the leader, after twisting his ridiculous blue face in an imbecilic grin at Grant, voiced a last wild giggle and dashed his head against a glittering stonebark tree. His companions casually picked up his body and moved off, with his head dragging behind them on its neck like a prisoner's ball on a chain. Grant brushed his hand across his forehead and turned wearily toward his stonebark log shack. A pair of tiny glittering red eyes caught his attention, and a slinker, Mus sapiens, skipped his 6-inch form across the threshold. Stratemeyer Syndicate produced the series. I did not know that. Sorry. A slinker, Mus sapiens, skipped his 6-inch form across the threshold, bearing under his tiny, skinny arm what looked very much like Grant's clinical thermometer. Grant yelled angrily at the creature, seized a stone, and flung it vainly. At the edge of the brush, the slinker turned its rat-like, semi-human face toward him, squeaked its thin gibberish, shook a microscopic fist in man-like wrath, and vanished, its bat-like cowl of skin fluttering like a cape. It looked, indeed, very much like a black rat wearing a cape. It had been a mistake, Grant knew, to throw the stone at it. Now the tiny fiends would never permit him any peace, and their diminutive size and pseudo-human intelligence made them infernally troublesome as enemies. Yet neither that reflection nor the loonies' suicide troubled him particularly. He had witnessed instances like the latter too often, and besides, his felt as if he were in for another siege of white fever. He entered the shack, closed the door, and stared down at his pet parcat. "Oliver," he growled, "you're a fine one. Why the devil don't you watch out for slinkers? What are you here for?" The parcat rose on its single, powerful hind leg, clawing at his knees with its 2 forelegs. "The red jack on the black queen," it observed placidly. 10 loonies make 1 half-wit. Grant placed both statements easily. The first was, of course, an echo of his preceding evening's solitaire game, and the second of yesterday's session with the loonies. He grunted abstractly and rubbed his aching head. White fever again, beyond doubt. He swallowed 2 feverin tablets and sank listlessly to the edge of his bunk, wondering whether this attack of Blanca would culminate in delirium. He cursed himself for a fool for ever taking this job on Jupiter's 3rd habitable moon, Io. The tiny world was a planet of madness, good for nothing except the production of furva leaves. Out of which earthly chemists made as many potent alkaloids as they once made from opium. Invaluable to medical science, of course, but what difference did that make to him? What difference even did the munificent salary make if he got back to Earth a raving maniac after a year in the equatorial regions of Io? He swore bitterly that when the plane from Junopolis landed next month for his furva, he'd go back to the polar city with it, even though his contract with Nylon Drug called for a full year, and he'd get no pay if he broke it. What good was money to a lunatic? I think, so there's definitely, like, terminology in here that refers to mental disturbance and things like that. Like, mad and lunatic, and in no way is that out of the ordinary for the time period, and honestly, those terms get used a lot today, too. What I find interesting, though, is how appropriate his selection of which term is. Because specifically using the word lunatic, it seems very appropriate, because the term lunatic was referred to people who were mentally disturbed, but it was believed that their mental disturbance was caused by the moon. So, if being on the moon Io is what's causing his mental disturbance and mental breakdown, lunatic is the appropriate term. Two, the whole little planet was mad. Loonies, parcats, slinkers, and Grant Calthorpe all crazy. At least anybody who ever ventured outside either of the two polar cities, Junopolis on the north and Hierapolis on the south, was crazy. One could live there in safety from white fever, but anywhere below the 20th parallel, it was worse than the Cambodian jungles of Earth. He amused himself by dreaming of Earth. Just 2 years ago, he had been happy there, known as a wealthy, popular sportsman. He had been just that, too. Before he was 21, he had hunted knife kite and threadworm on Titan, and triops and uniped on Venus. Knife kite sounds terrifying. Threadworm also doesn't sound pleasant. Triops. I'm assuming something with 3 eyes. And uniped is definitely something with 1 foot. Based on the terms used. That had been before the gold crisis of 2110 and had wiped out his fortune. And, well, if he had to work, it had seemed logical to use his interplanetary experiences as a means of livelihood. He had really been enthusiastic at the chance to associate himself with Nylon Drug. Okay, so we know this is set sometime within 2 years of 2110. So sometime between 2110 and 2112. Because of, like, 2 years ago, he was on Earth. And that had been before the gold crisis of 2110. Okay, so maybe not. Well, no, 2 years ago. But that was before the gold crisis, so 2110 happened sometime in that 2 years. And that is less than 100 years from now. But this story can't possibly take place because Io is not a jungle moon. Anyway. He had never been on Io before. This wild little world was no sportsman's paradise, with its idiotic loonies and wicked, intelligent slinkers. Wicked, intelligent, tiny slinkers. There wasn't anything worth hunting on the feverish little moon. Bathed in warmth by the giant Jupiter, only 250,000 miles away. If he had happened to visit it, he told himself ruefully, he'd never have taken the job. He had visualized Io as something like Titan, cold but clean. Instead, it was as hot as the Venus hotlands because of its glowing primary, and subject to half a dozen different forms of steamy daylight. Sun Day, Jovian Day, Jovian and Sun Day, Europa Light, and occasionally Actual and Dismal Night. And most of these came in the course of Io's 42-hour revolution, too. A mad succession of changing lights. He hated the dizzy days, the jungle, and Idiot's Hills stretching behind his shack. It was Jovian and Solar Day at the present moment, and that was the worst of all because the distant sun added its modicum of heat to that of Jupiter, and to complete Grant's discomfort now was the prospect of a white fever attack. He swore as his head gave an additional twinge, and then swallowed another feverin tablet. His supply of these was diminishing, he noticed. He'd have to remember to ask for some when the plane called. No, he was going back with it. Oliver rubbed against his leg. Idiots, fools, nitwits, imbeciles, remarked Parkat affectionately. Why did I have to go to that damn dance? Huh? Said Grant. He couldn't remember having said anything about a dance. It must, he decided, have been said during his last fever madness. Oliver creaked like the door, then giggled like a loony. It'll be all right, he assured Grant. Father is bound to come soon. Father? Echoed the man. His father had died 15 years before. Where'd you get that from, Oliver? It must be the fever, observed Oliver placidly. You're a nice kitty, but I wish you had sense enough to know what you're saying. And I wish Father would come. He finished with a suppressed gurgle that might have been a sob. Grant stared dizzily at him. He hadn't said any of those things, he was positive. The Parkat must have heard them from somebody else. Somebody else? Where within 500 miles was there anybody else? Oliver, he bellowed, where do you hear that? Where'd you hear it? The Parkat backed away, startled. Father is idiots, fools, nitwits, imbeciles, he said anxiously. The red jack on the nice kitty. Come here, roared Grant. Whose father? Where have you... Come here, you imp! He lunged at the creature. Oliver flexed his single hind leg and flung himself frantically to the cowl of the wood stove. It must be the fever, he squalled. No chocolate! He leapt like a three-legged flash for the flue opening. There came a sound of claws grating on metal, and then he had scrambled through. Okay, I love the cat. I love the parrot cat that can repeat phrases. It even mixed them together. I love it. Grant followed him. His head ached from the effort, and with this still sane part of his mind, he knew that the whole episode was doubtless white fever delirium, but he plowed on. His progress was a nightmare. Loonies kept bobbing their long necks above the tall bleeding grass, their idiotic giggles and imbecilic faces adding to the general atmosphere of madness. Wisps of fetid, fever-bearing vapors spouted up at every step on the spongy soil. Somewhere to his right a slinker squeaked and gibbered. He knew that a tiny slinker village was over in that direction, for once he had glimpsed the neat little buildings constructed of small, perfectly fitted stones like a miniature medieval town, complete to towers and battlements. It was said that there were even slinker wars. His head buzzed and whirled from the combined effects of feverin and fever. It was an attack of Blanca, all right. Blancha? I don't know. Blancha, Blanca, Right enough. He realized that he was an imbecile. A loony, to wander thus away from his shack. He should be lying on his bunk. The fever was not serious, but more than one man had died on Io in the delirium with its attendant hallucinations. He was delirious now. He knew it as soon as he saw Oliver, for Oliver was placidly regarding an attractive young lady in perfect evening dress of the style of the second decade of the 22nd century. So, an evening dress of the current style. Ah yes, the correct way to catch a cat is to lunge at it. That'll definitely work. Because the second decade of the 22nd century would be the 2110s. And we've already determined that it's sometime between 2110 and 2112. So it is a current style evening dress. That's an odd way to say that she's in fashion. Very obviously, that was a hallucination, since girls had no business in the Ionian tropics, and if by some wild chance one should appear there, she would certainly not choose formal garb. The hallucination had fever, apparently, for her face was pale with the whiteness that gave Blanche its name. Her gray eyes regarded him without surprise as he wound his way through the bleeding grass to her. Good afternoon, evening, or morning, he remarked, giving a puzzled glance at Jupiter, which was rising, and the sun, which was setting, or perhaps merely good day, Miss Lee Nylan. Apparently he knows who she is, too. She gazed seriously at him. Do you know, she said, you're the first one of the illusions that I haven't recognized. All my friends have been around, but you're the first stranger. Or are you a stranger? You know my name, but you ought to, of course, being my own hallucination. We won't argue about which of us is the hallucination, he suggested. Let's do it this way. The one of us that disappears first is the illusion. Bet you $5 you do. How could I collect, she said. I can't very well collect from my own dream. That is a problem, he frowned. My problem, of course, not yours. I know I'm real. How do you know my name? She demanded. Ah, he said, from intensive reading of the society sections of the newspapers brought by my supply plane. As a matter of fact, I have one of your pictures cut out and pasted next to my bunk. That probably accounts for my seeing you now. I'd like to really meet you sometime. What a gallant remark for an apparition, she exclaimed. And who are you supposed to be? Why, I'm Grant Calthorpe. In fact, I work for your father, trading with the loonies for Furva. Grant Calthorpe, she echoed. She narrowed her fever-dulled eyes as if to bring him into better focus. Why, you are! Her voice wavered for a moment, and she brushed her hand across her pale brow. Why should you pop up out of my memories? It's strange. 3 or 4 years ago, when I was a romantic schoolgirl and you the famous sportsman, I was madly in love with you. I had a whole book filled with your pictures. Grant Calthorpe dressed in parka for hunting threadworm on Titan. Grant Calthorpe beside the giant uniped he killed near the Mountains of Eternity. You're really the pleasantest hallucination I've had so far. Delirium would be fun. She pressed her hand to her brow again. If one's head didn't ache so. Gee, thought Grant, I wish this were true about that about the book. This is what psychology calls a wish fulfillment dream. A drop of warm rain plopped on his neck. Got to get to bed, he said aloud. Rain's bad for Blanche. Hope to see you next time I'm feverish. Thank you, said Lee Nylan with dignity. It's quite mutual. He nodded, sending a twinge through his head. Here, Oliver, he said to the drowsing parcat. Come on. That isn't Oliver, said Lee. It's Polly. It's kept me company for 2 days, and I've named it Polly. Wrong gender, muttered Grant. Anyway, it's my parcat, Oliver. Aren't you, Oliver? Hope to see you, said Oliver sleepily. It's Polly. Aren't you, Polly? Bet you $5, said the parcat. He rose, stretched, and loped off into the underbrush. It must be the fever, he observed as he vanished. It must be, agreed Grant. He turned away. Goodbye, miss. Or I might as well call you Lee, since you're not real. Goodbye, Lee. Goodbye, Grant. But don't go that way. There's a slinker village over in the grass. No, it's over there. It's there, she insisted. I've been watching them build it, but they can't hurt you anyway, can they? Not even a slinker could hurt an apparition. Goodbye, Grant. She closed her eyes wearily. 3. It was raining harder now. Grant pushed his way through the bleeding grass, whose red sap collected in bloody drops on his boots. He had to get back to his shack quickly, before the white fever and its attendant delirium set him wandering utterly astray. He needed feverin. Suddenly, he stopped short. Directly before him, the grass had been cleared away, and in the little clearing were the shoulder-high towers and battlements of a slinker village. A new one, for half-finished houses, stood among the others, and hooded 6-inch forms toiled over the stones. There was an outcry of squeaks and gibberish. He backed away, but a dozen tiny darts whizzed about him. One struck like a toothpick in his boot, but none, luckily, scratched his skin, for they were undoubtedly poisoned. He moved more quickly, but all around in the thick, fleshy grasses were rustlings, squeakings, and incomprehensible imprecations. He circled away. Loonies kept popping their balloon heads over the vegetation, and now and again one giggled in pain as a slinker bit or stabbed it. Wait a minute. They pop their heads? Oh, okay. Because they were described as balloons, I was thinking popping their balloon heads as in a balloon popping. The important word here is over. They were popping their heads over the vegetation, meaning raising them above the vegetation, not popping as in a balloon popping. That has two very different meanings. Yeah, exactly. Oh, good. Key squared. Especially because the very first scene, we had a loony committing suicide. So I worried for a moment. Grant cut toward a group of the creatures, hoping to distract the tiny fiends in the grass, and a tall, purple-faced loony curved its long neck above him, giggling and gesturing with its skinny fingers at a bundle under its arm. He ignored the thing and veered toward his shack. He seemed to have eluded the slinkers. So he trudged doggedly on, for he needed a feverin tablet badly. Yet, suddenly, he came to a frowning halt, turned, and began to retrace his steps. It can't be so, he muttered, but she told me the truth about the slinker village. I didn't know it was there. Yet, how could a hallucination tell me something I didn't know? Lee Nyland was sitting on the stone bark log exactly as he had left her, with Oliver again at her side. Her eyes were closed, and two slinkers were cutting at the long skirt of her gown with tiny glittering knives. His logic is somewhat flawed, in that he's wondering, how could a hallucination tell me something I didn't know? Easily. She was telling you about a village that you didn't know was there. So you imagined the village, too. You hallucinated a hallucination telling you about the village, and then hallucinated the village. Easy. Grant knew that they were always attracted by terrestrial textiles. Apparently they were unable to duplicate the fascinating sheen of satin, though the fiends were infernally clever with their tiny hands. As he approached, they tore a strip from thigh to ankle, but the girl made no move. Grant shouted, and the vicious little creatures mouthed unutterable curses at him as they skittered away with their silken plunder. Lee Nyland opened her eyes. You again, she murmured vaguely. A moment ago it was Father. Now it's you. Her pallor had increased. The white fever was running its course in her body. Your father? Then that's where Oliver heard. Listen, Lee, I found the Slinker Village. I didn't know it was there, but I found it, just as you said. Do you see what that means? We're both real. Real? She said dully. There's a purple loony grinning over your shoulder. Make him go away. He makes me feel sick. He glanced around. True enough, the purple-faced loony was behind him. Look here, he said, seizing her arm. The feel of her smooth skin was added proof. You're coming to the shack for feverin. He pulled her to her feet. Don't you understand? I'm real. No, you're not, she said dazedly. Listen, Lee. I don't know how in the devil you got here or why, but I know Io hasn't driven me that crazy yet. You're real, and I'm real. He shook her violently. I'm real, he shouted. Faint comprehension showed in her dazed eyes. Real? She whispered. Real? Oh, Lord. Then take me out of this mad place. She swayed, made a stubborn effort to control herself, then pitched forward against him. Of course, on Io, her weight was negligible, less than a third of Earth normal. He swung her into his arms and set off toward the shack, keeping well away from both slinker settlements. Around him bobbed excited loonies, and now and again the purple-faced one, or another exactly like him, giggled and pointed and gestured. The rain had increased, and warm rivulets flowed down his neck, and to add to the madness, he blundered near a copse of stinging palms, and their barbed lashes stung painfully through his shirt. Those stings were virulent, too, if one failed to disinfect them. Those stings were virulent, too, if one failed to disinfect them. Indeed, it was largely the stinging palms that kept traders from gathering their own furva instead of depending on the loonies. Behind the low rain clouds, the sun had set, and it was ruddy Jupiter daylight, which lent a false flush to the cheeks of the unconsciously lean island, making her still features very lovely. Perhaps he kept his eyes too steadily on her face, for suddenly Grant was among slinkers again. They were squeaking and sputtering, and the purple loony leapt in pain as teeth and darts pricked his legs, but of course, loonies were immune to the poison. The tiny devils were around his feet now. He swore in a low voice and kicked vigorously, sending a rat-like form spinning 50 feet in the air. He had both automatic and flame pistol at his hip, but he could not use them for several reasons. First, using an automatic against the tiny hordes was much like firing into a swarm of mosquitoes. If the bullet killed one or two or a dozen, it made no appreciable impression on the remaining thousands. And as for the flame pistol, it was like using a big Bertha to swat a fly. Its vast belch of fire would certainly incinerate all the slinkers in its immediate path, along with grass, trees, and loonies, but that again would make but little impress on the surviving hordes, and it meant laboriously recharging the pistol with another black diamond and another barrel. He had gas bulbs in the shack, but they were not available at the moment. And besides, he had no spare mask, and no chemist has yet succeeded in devising a gas that would kill slinkers without being also deadly to humans. And finally, he couldn't use any weapon whatsoever right now because he dared not drop Lean Island to free his hands. Ahead was the clearing around the shack. The space was full of slinkers, but the shack itself was supposed to be slinker-proof, at least for reasonable lengths of time, since stonebark logs were very resistant to their tiny tools. Apparently, we get an illustration. She's real! Oh Lord, help us get out of this mad place! I love, you can see the slinkers that look like mice with bat wing cowls around their necks. Of course, there's the loony, who's, I'm assuming that's the purple-faced one that's following him. I think it's got a pack of the leaves he wants. He's just too delirious to notice. And then, of course, he's carrying Lee. Sorry. I need to remember to breathe when I'm reading. But Grant perceived that a group of the diminutive devils were around the door, and suddenly he realized their intent. They had looped a cord of some sort over the knob and were engaged now in twisting it. Grant yelled and broke into a run. While he was yet half 100 feet distant, the door swung inward, and the rabble of slinkers flowed into the shack. He dashed through the entrance. Within was turmoil. Little hooded shapes were cutting at the blankets on his bunk, his extra clothing, the sacks he hoped to fill with furva leaves, and were pulling at the cooking utensils, or at any and all loose objects. He bellowed and kicked at the swarm. A wild chorus of squeaks and gibberish arose as the creatures skipped and dodged about him. The fiends were intelligent enough to realize that he could do nothing with his arms occupied by Lee Nyland. They skittered out of the way of his kicks, and while he threatened to group at the stove, another rabble tore at his blankets. In desperation, he charged at the bunk. He swept the girl's body across it to clear it, dropped her on it, and seized a grass broom he had made to facilitate his housekeeping. With wide strokes of its handle, he attacked the slinkers, and the squeals were checkered by cries and whimpers of pain. A few broke for the door, dragging whatever loot they had. He spun around in time to see half a dozen swarming around Lee Nyland, tearing at her clothing, at the wristwatch on her arm, at the satin evening pumps on her small feet. He roared a curse at them and battered them away, hoping that none had pricked her skin with virulent dagger or poisonous tooth. He began to win the skirmish. More of the creatures drew their black capes close about them and scurried over the threshold with their plunder. At last, with a burst of squeaks, the remainder, laden and empty-handed alike, broke and ran for safety, leaving a dozen furry, impish bodies slain or wounded. Grant swept these after the others with his erstwhile weapon, closed the door in the face of a loony that bobbed in the opening, latched it against any repetition of the slinker's trick, and stared in dismay about the plundered dwelling. Cans had been rolled or dragged away, every loose object had been pawed by the slinker's foul little hands, and Grant's clothes hung in ruins on their hooks against the wall. But the tiny robbers had not succeeded in opening the cabinet nor the table drawer, and there was food left. 6 months of Ionian life had left him philosophical. He swore heartily, shrugged resignedly, and pulled his bottle of feverin from the cabinet. His own spell of fever had vanished as suddenly and completely as Blanche always does when treated, but the girl lacking feverin was paper white and still. Grant glanced at the bottle. 8 tablets remained. Well, I can always chew I can always chew furva leaves, he muttered. That was less effective than the alkaloid itself, but it would serve, and Lee Nyland needed the tablets. Okay, we're about to be attacked by advertisements, so I'm going to take us to the Be Right Back screen, and we will continue this in about 3 minutes. Okay. I believe we're back. And I actually have audio this time. Unlike the last 2 weeks where I came back from break and nobody could hear me. Alright, where were we? Well, I can always chew furva leaves, he muttered. That was less effective than the alkaloid itself, but it would serve, and Lee Nyland needed the tablets. He dissolved 2 of them in a glass of water and lifted her head. She was not too inert to swallow, and he poured the solution between her pale lips, then arranged her as comfortably as he could. Her dress was a tattered silken ruin, and he covered her with a blanket that was no less a ruin. Then he disinfected his palm stings, pulled 2 chairs together, and sprawled across them to sleep. He started up at the sound of claws on the roof. But it was only Oliver, gingerly testing the flue to see if it were hot. In a moment, the parcat scrambled through, stretched himself, and remarked, "I'm real and you're real." What happened? Sayuri, thank you for subscribing, but I also don't know why it made that announcement because I don't see an alert. Did you do a resubscription? You must have. The activity feed does not have it. I think Eric mentioned something about that too, about the things not showing up in feed properly. There must be something out of whack. But see, now I don't know if he'll show up in the... It was a Prime sub? It should still show up in my... That's odd. Because that should still show up in the alerts. Yeah, I don't know. Because it didn't show up in Firebot, but it also just didn't show up in the activity feed on Twitch. Whatever. I don't know if it'll be in the credits. I'll try to remember. But thank you. Okay, the cat. I'm real and you're real. Imagine that, grunted Grant sleepily. Yeah, something's off, because I know other people have had some issues today, but... 4. When he awoke, it was Jupiter and Europa light, which meant he had slept about 7 hours, since the brilliant little third moon was just rising. He rose and gazed at Lee Nyland, who was sleeping soundly with a tinge of color in her face that was not entirely due to the ruddy daylight. The Blancha was passing. He dissolved 2 more tablets in water, then shook the girl's shoulder. You haven't gotten any ads for a while, even though you didn't have a subscription? Or... Because I have it set to not have ads if you're subscribed. That I'm able to do. But I can't get rid of them entirely. And so I do the 3 minutes, because otherwise anybody without a subscription would get ads when they arrive at the channel. And I would rather just bunch them all together, take a break, and let people who arrive without a subscription arrive and not have to suffer ads. Because there's no way for me to turn off the pre-rolls other than by running ads. Huh. Interesting. I will investigate further, because if I don't have to take ad breaks, I won't. If there's a way for me to just not have them at all, I will happily get rid of them. He dissolved 2 more tablets in water, then shook the girl's shoulder. Instantly, her gray eyes opened, quite clear now, and she looked up at him without surprise. "Hello, Grant," she murmured. "So it's you again. Fever isn't so bad, after all." "Maybe I ought to let you stay feverish," he grinned. "You say such nice things." "Wake up and drink this, Lee." She became suddenly aware of the shack's interior. "Why, where is this? It looks real." "It is. Drink the fever in." She obeyed, then lay back and stared at him perplexedly. "Real? she said. And you're real? I think I am. A rush of tears clouded her eyes. Then I'm out of that place? That horrible place? You certainly are. He saw signs of her relief becoming hysteria, and hastened to distract her. Would you mind telling me how you happened to be there, and dressed for a party, too? She controlled herself. I was dressed for a party in Herapolis, but I was in Junopolis, you see. I don't see. In the first place, what are you doing on Io, anyway? Every time I ever heard of you, it was in connection with New York or Paris society. She smiled. Then it wasn't all delirium, was it? You did say that you had one of my pictures. Oh, that one. She frowned at the print. On the wall. Next time a news photographer wants to snap my picture, I'll remember not to grin like a loony. But as to how I happened to be on Io, I came with Father, who's looking over the possibilities of raising ferva on plantations instead of having to depend on traders and loonies. We've been here 3 months, and I've been terribly bored. I thought Io would be exciting, but it wasn't. Until recently. But what about the dance? How'd you manage to get here 1,000 miles from Junopolis? Well, she said slowly, it was terribly tiresome in Junopolis. No shows, no sport, nothing but an occasional dance. I got restless. When there were dances in Herapolis, I formed the habit of flying over there. It's only 4 or 5 hours in a fast plane, you know. And last week, or whenever it was, I'd planned on flying down, and Harvey, that's Father's secretary, was to take me, but at the last minute Father needed him and forbade my flying alone. Grant felt a strong dislike for Harvey. Well, he asked. So I flew alone, she finished demurely. And cracked up, eh? I can fly as well as anybody, she retorted. It was just that I followed a different route, and suddenly there were mountains ahead. He nodded. The Idiot's Hills, he said. My supply plane detours 500 miles to avoid them. They're not high, but they stick right out above the atmosphere of this crazy planet. The air here is dense, but shallow. I know that. I knew I couldn't fly above them, but I thought I could hurdle them. Work up full speed, you know, and then throw the plane upward. I had a closed plane, and gravitation is so weak here, and besides, I've seen it done several times, especially with rocket-driven craft. The jets help to support the plane, even after the wings are useless for lack of air. What a damn fool stunt! Exclaimed Grant. Sure, it can be done, but you have to be an expert to pull it out of it. When you hit the air on the other side, you hit fast, and there isn't much falling room. So I found out, said Lee ruefully. I almost pulled out, but not quite, and I hid in the middle of some stinging palms. I guess the crash dazed them because I managed to get out before they started lashing around. But I couldn't reach my plane again, and it was, I only remember 2 days of it, but it was horrible. It must have been, he said gently. I knew that if I didn't eat or drink, I had a chance of avoiding white fever. The not eating wasn't so bad, but the not drinking. Well, I finally gave up and drank out of a brook. I didn't care what happened if I could have a few moments that weren't thirst-tortured. And after that, it's all confused and vague. You should have chewed ferva leaves. I didn't know that. I would have. I wouldn't have even known what they looked like. And besides, I kept expecting Father to appear. He must be having a search made by now. He probably is, rejoined Grant, ironically. Has it occurred to you that there are 13 million square miles of surface on Little Io, and that for all he knows you might have crashed on any square mile of it? When you're flying from North Pole to South Pole, there isn't any shortest route. You can cross any point on the planet. Her gray eyes started wide. But Furthermore, said Grant, this is probably the last place a searching party would look. They wouldn't think anyone but a loony would try to hurdle Idiot's Hills, in which thesis I quite agree. So it looks very much, Lee Nyland, as if you're marooned here until my supply plane gets here next month. But Father will be crazy. He'll think I'm dead. He thinks that now, no doubt. But we can't, she broke off, staring around the tiny shack's single room. After a moment, she sighed resignedly, smiled, and said softly, Well, it might have been worse, Grant. I'll try to earn my keep. Good. How do you feel, Lee? Quite normal. I'll start right to work. She flung off the tattered blanket, sat up, and dropped her feet to the floor. I'll fix Good night! My dress! She snatched the blanket about her again. He grinned. We had a little run-in with Slinkers after you'd passed out. They did for my spare wardrobe, too. It's ruined, she wailed. Would needle and thread help? They left that, at least, because it was in the table drawer. Why, I couldn't make a good swimming suit out of this, she retorted. Let me try one of yours. By dint of cutting, patching, and mending, she at last managed to piece one of Grant's suits to respectable proportions. She looked very lovely in shirt and trousers, but he was troubled to note that a sullen pallor had overtaken her. It was the reblancha, the second spell of fever that usually followed a severe or prolonged attack. His face was serious as he cupped 2 of his last 4 feverin tablets in his hand. Take these, he ordered, and we've got to get some furva leaves somewhere. The plane took my supply away last week, and I've had bad luck with my loonies ever since. They haven't brought me anything but weeds and rubbish. Lee puckered her lips at the bitterness of the drug, then closed her eyes against its momentary dizziness and nausea. Where can you find furva? She asked. He shook his head perplexedly, glancing out at the setting mass of Jupiter, with its bands glowing creamy and brown and the red spot boiling near the western edge. Close above it was the brilliant little disk of Europa. He frowned suddenly, glanced at his watch, and then at the almanac on the inside of the cabinet door. It'll be Europa light in 15 minutes, he muttered, and true night in 25. The first true night in half a month. I wonder. He gazed thoughtfully at Lee's face. He knew where furva grew. One dared not penetrate the jungle itself, where stinging palms and arrow vines and the deadly worms called toothers made such a venture sheer suicide for any creatures but loonies and slinkers. But he knew where furva grew. In Io's rare true night, In Io's rare true night, even the clearing might be dangerous. Not merely from slinkers either. He knew well enough that in the darkness creatures crept out of the jungle who otherwise remained in the eternal shadows of its depths. Toothers, bullet-head frogs, and doubtless many unknown slimy, venomous, mysterious beings never seen by man. One heard stories in Hierapolis, but he had to get furva, and he knew where it grew. Not even a loony would try to gather it there, but in the little gardens or farms around the tiny slinker towns, there was furva growing. He switched on a light in the gathering dusk. I'm going outside a moment, he told Lee Nyland. If the Blancha starts coming back, take the other 2 tablets. Wouldn't hurt you to take them anyway. The slinkers got away with my thermometer, but if you get dizzy again, you take them. Grant, where? I'll be back, he called, closing the door behind it. A loony, purple in the bluish Europa light, bobbed up with a long giggle. He waved the creature aside and set off on a cautious approach to the neighborhood of the Slinker village. The old one, for the other could hardly have had time to cultivate its surrounding ground. He crept warily through the bleeding grass, but he knew his stealth was pure optimism. He was in exactly the position of a 100-foot giant trying to approach a human city in secrecy. A difficult matter even in the utter darkness of night. He reached the edge of the Slinker clearing. Behind him, Europa, moving as fast as the second hand on his watch, plummeted toward the horizon. He paused in momentary surprise at the sight of the exquisite little town 100 feet away across the tiny square fields, with lights flickering in its hand-wide windows. He had not known that Slinker culture included the use of lights, but there they were, tiny candles or perhaps diminutive oil lamps. He blinked in the darkness. The second of the 10-foot fields looked like it was Furva. He stooped low, crept out, and reached his hand for the fleshy white leaves. At that moment came a shrill giggle and a crackle of grass behind him. The loony! The idiotic purple loony! Squeaking shrieks sounded. He snatched a double handful of Furva, rose, and dashed toward the lighted window of his shack. He had no wish to face poisoned barbs or disease-bearing teeth, and the Slinkers were certainly aroused. Their gibbering sounded in chorus. The ground looked black with them. He reached the shack, burst in, slammed and latched the door. Got it, he grinned. Let 'em rave outside now. They were raving. Their gibberish sounded like the creaking of worn machinery. Even Oliver opened his drowsy eyes to listen. It must be the fever, observed the parcat placidly. Lee was certainly no paler. The reblancha was passing safely. Ugh, she said, listening to the tumult without. I've always hated rats, but Slinkers are worse. All the shrewdness and viciousness of rats, plus the intelligence of devils. Well, said Grant thoughtfully, I don't see what they can do. They've had it in for me anyway. It sounds as if they're going off, said the girl, listening. The noise is fading. Grant peered out of the window. They're still around. They've just passed from swearing to planning, and I wish I knew what. Someday, if this crazy little planet ever becomes worth human occupation, there's going to be a showdown between humans and Slinkers. Well, they're not civilized enough to be really a serious obstacle, and they're so small besides. But they learn, he said. They learn so quickly, and they breed like flies. Suppose they pick up the use of gas, or suppose they develop little rifles for their poisonous darts. That's possible, because they work in metals right now, and they know fire. That would put them practically on a par with man as far as offense goes. For what good are our giant cannons and rocket planes against 6-inch Slinkers? And to be just on even terms would be fatal. One Slinker for one man would be a hell of a trade. Lee yawned. Well, it's not our problem. I'm hungry, Grant. Good. That's a sign the Blanche's through with you. We'll eat and then sleep a while, for there's 5 hours of darkness. But the Slinkers? I don't see what they can do. They couldn't eat through stonebark. They couldn't eat through stonebark walls in 5 hours anyway. Oliver would warn us if one managed to slip in somewhere. 5. It was light when Grant awoke, and he stretched his cramped limbs painfully across his 2 chairs. Something had awakened him, but he didn't know just what. Oliver was pacing nervously beside him, and now looked anxiously up at him. I've had bad luck with my loonies, announced the parcat plaintively. You're a nice kitty. So are you, said Grant. Something had wakened him, but what? Then he knew, for it came again. The merest trembling of the stonebark floor. He frowned in puzzlement. Earthquakes? Not on Io, for the tiny sphere had lost its internal heat untold ages ago. Then what? Comprehension dawned slowly. He sprang to his feet with so wild a yell that Oliver scrambled sideways, with an infernal babble. The startled parcat leapt to the stove and vanished up the flue. His squall drifted faintly back. It must be the fever. Lee had started to a sitting position on the bunk, her gray eyes blinking sleepily. Outside, he roared, pulling her to her feet. Get out! Quickly! What? Why? Get out! He thrust her through the door, then spun to seize his belt and weapons, the bag of furva leaves, a package of chocolate. The floor trembled again, and he burst out of the door with a frantic leap to the side of the dazed girl. They've undermined it, he choked. The devils undermined the... He had no time to say more. A corner of the shack suddenly subsided. The stonebark logs grated, and the whole structure collapsed like a child's house of blocks. The crash died into silence, and there was no motion save a lazy wisp of vapor, a few black, rat-like forms scurrying toward the grass, and a purple loony bobbing beyond the ruins. "The dirty devils!" he swore bitterly. "The damn little black rats! A dart whistled so close that it grazed his ear and then twitched a lock of Lee's tousled brown hair. A chorus of squeaking sounded in the bleeding grass. "Come on!" he cried. "They're out to exterminate us this time. No, this way, toward the hills. There's less jungle this way." They could outrun the tiny slinkers easily enough. In a few moments, they had lost the sound of squeaking voices, and they stopped to gaze ruefully back on the fallen dwelling. "Now," he said miserably, "we're both where you were to start with." We have another illustration. Oh, wait. "Oh no!" Lee looked up at him. "We're together now, Grant. I'm not afraid." Okay, so we've got an illustration. "I'll be damned, Lee." I'll be damned, Lee. They're packed in the canyon. The whole devil's brood of them." I suppose we'll find out what that's about. "We'll manage," he said, with a show of assurance. "We'll put up a temporary shack somehow. A dart struck his boot with a sharp bloop. The slinkers had caught up to them. Again they ran toward Idiot's Hills. When at last they stopped, they could look down a long slope and far over the Ionian jungles. There was the ruined shack, and there, neatly checkered, the fields and towers of the nearer Slinker town. But they had scarcely caught their breaths when gibbering and squeaking came out of the brush. They were being driven into Idiot's Hills, a region as unknown to man as the icy wastes of Pluto. It was as if the tiny fiends behind them had determined that this time their enemy, the giant trampler and despoiler of their fields, should be pursued to extinction. Weapons were useless. Grant could not even glimpse their pursuers, slipping like hooded rats through the vegetation. A bullet, even if chance sped it through a slinker's body, was futile, and his flame pistol, though its lightning stroke should incinerate tons of brush and bleeding grass, could no more than cut a narrow path through their horde of tormentors. The only weapons that might have availed, the gas bulbs, were lost in the ruins of the shack. Grant and Lee were forced upward. They had risen 1,000 feet above the plain, and the air was thinning. There was no jungle here, but only great stretches of bleeding grass, across which a few loonies were visible, bobbing their heads on their long necks. "Toward the peaks!" gasped Grant, now painfully short of breath. "Perhaps we can stand rarer air than they." Lee was beyond answer. She panted doggedly along beside him as they plodded now over patches of bare rock. Before them were two low peaks, like the pillars of a gate. Glancing back, Grant caught a glimpse of tiny black forms on a clear area, and in sheer anger he fired a shot. A single slinker leapt convulsively, its cape flapping, but the rest flowed on. There must have been thousands of them. The peaks were closer, no more than a few hundred yards away. They were sheer, smooth, unscalable. "Between them," muttered Grant. The passage that separated them was bare and narrow. The twin peaks had been one in ages past. Some forgotten volcanic convulsion had split them, leaving this slender canyon between. He slipped an arm about Lee, whose breath, from effort and altitude, was a series of rasping gasps. A bright dart tinkled on the rocks as they reached the opening, but looking back, Grant could see only a purple loony plodding upward, and a few more to his right. They raced down a straight 50-foot passage that debouched suddenly into a sizable valley. And there, thunderstruck for a moment, they paused. A city lay there. For a brief instant, Grant thought they had burst upon a vast slinker metropolis, but the merest glance showed otherwise. This was no city of medieval blocks, but a poem in marble, classical in beauty, and of human or near-human proportions. White columns, glorious arches, pure, curving domes, an architectural loveliness that might have been born on the Acropolis. It took a second look to discern that the city was dead, deserted, in ruins. Even in her exhaustion, Lee felt its beauty. How exquisite, she panted. One could almost forgive them for being slinkers. They won't forgive us for being human, he muttered. We'll have to make a stand somewhere. We'd better pick a building. But before they could move more than a few feet from the canyon mouth, a wild disturbance halted them. Grant whirled, and for a moment found himself actually paralyzed by amazement. The narrow canyon was filled with a gibbering horde of slinkers, like a nauseous, heaving, black carpet. But they came no further than the valley end, for grinning, giggling, and bobbing, blocking the opening with tramping three-toed feet, were 4 loonies. It was a battle. The slinkers were biting and stabbing at the miserable defenders, whose shrill keenings of pain were less giggles than shrieks, but with a determination and purpose utterly foreign to loonies. Their clawed feet tramped methodically up and down, up and down. Grant exploded. I'll be damned! Then an idea struck him. Lee! They're packed in the canyon! The whole devil's brood of them! He rushed toward the opening. He thrust his flame pistol between the skinny legs of a loony, aimed it straight along the canyon, and fired. 6. Inferno Burst! The tiny diamond, giving up all its energy in one terrific blast, shot a jagged stream of fire that filled the canyon from wall to wall and vomited out beyond to cut a fan of fire through the bleeding grass of the slope. I know, lots of drama, Bastard Cider. Idiot's Hills reverberated to the roar, and when the rain of debris settled, there was nothing in the canyon save a few bits of flesh and the head of an unfortunate loony still bouncing and rolling. 3 of the loonies survived. A purple-faced one was pulling his arm, grinning and giggling in imbecile glee. He waved the thing aside and returned to the girl. Thank goodness, he said. We're out of that anyway. I wasn't afraid, Grant. Not with you. He smiled. Perhaps we can find a place here, he suggested. The fever ought to be less troublesome at this altitude. But say, this must have been the capital city of the whole slinker race in ancient times. I can scarcely imagine those fiends creating an architecture as beautiful as this, or as large. Why, these buildings are as colossal in proportion to slinker size as the skyscrapers of New York to us. But so beautiful, said Lee softly, sweeping her eyes over the glory of the ruins. One might almost forgive. Grant, look at those! He followed the gesture. On the inner side of the canyon's portals were gigantic carvings, but the thing that set him staring in amazement was the subject of the portrayal. There, towering far up the cliffsides, were the figures not of slinkers, but of loonies, exquisitely carved, smiling rather than grinning, and smiling somehow sadly, regretfully, pityingly, yet beyond doubt loonies. Good night, he whispered. Do you see, Lee? This must have been a loony city. The steps, the doors, the buildings, all are on their scale of size. Somehow, sometime, they must have achieved civilization, and the loonies we know are the degenerate residue of a great race. Hello, Raiders! Welcome, 16-Bit Eric. Hello, Whimsies. It is good to see you. I hope that the rest of your stream went well, Eric. Thank you for coming over, everybody. If you don't know, I'm Rogan27, aka Anthony Wright Day Hernandez. I'm the Community Collections Archivist at Virginia Tech, and this is Archival Adventures. This is a program I do roughly once a week on Wednesday, where we pull items from the collections here in Special Collections and University Archives and see what we can learn. This week we are on the 18th story, listed on a list created by Sam Moskowitz in 1940. Moskowitz was a science fiction critic, and he listed 19 stories in a letter to the editor for the first issue of Comet, the pulp magazine. Listed 19 stories that he saw as classics of science fiction, despite the fact that they were all less than 10 years old. And so we've been reading them to see how they stand up to the term classic. And most of them have so far. As I said, this is the penultimate one. And it is The Mad Moon by Stanley Weinbaum on a fictional IO. But yeah, welcome everybody. If anybody was here that was not following 16-Bit Eric, I highly encourage you to do so. He has a wonderful community and is just a spectacular human. Let's see. And, put in Lee, the reason those four blocked the way when the slinkers tried to come through is that they still remember. Or probably they don't actually remember, but they have a tradition of past glories, or more likely still, just a superstitious feeling that this place is in some way sacred. They let us pass because, after all, we look more like loonies than like slinkers. But the amazing thing is that they still possess even a dim memory, because this city must have been in ruins for centuries, or perhaps even for thousands of years. But to think that loonies could ever have had the intelligence to create a culture of their own, said Grant, waving away the purple one, bobbing and giggling at his side. Suddenly he paused, turning a gaze of new respect on the creature. This one's been following me for days. All right, old chap, what is it? The purple one extended a sorely bedraggled bundle of bleeding grass and twigs, giggling idiotically. His ridiculous mouth twisted. His eyes popped in an agony of effort at mental concentration. Canny, he giggled It's the first time one of them has spoken. Canny, he giggled triumphantly. The imbecile, flared Grant. Nitwit! Idiot! He broke off, then laughed. Never mind. I guess you deserve it. He tossed his package of chocolate to the three delighted loonies. Here's your candy. A scream from Lee startled him. She was waving her arms wildly. And over the crest of Idiot's Hill, a rocket plane roared, circled, and nosed its way into the valley. The door opened. Oliver stalked gravely out, remarking casually, I'm real and you're real. A man followed the parcat. Two men. Father! Screamed Lee. It was some time later that Gustavus Nyland turned to Grant. I can't thank you, he said. If there's ever any way I can show my appreciation for... There is. You can cancel my contract. Oh, you work for me? I'm Grant Calthorpe, one of your traders, and I'm about sick of this crazy planet. Of course, if you wish, if it's a question of pay, you can pay me for the 6 months I've worked. If you'd care to stay, said the older man, there won't be trading much longer. We've been able to grow furva near the polar cities, and I prefer plantations to the uncertainties of relying on loonies. If you'd work out your year, we might be able to put you in charge of a plantation by the end of that time. Grant met Lee Nyland's gray eyes and hesitated. Thanks, he said slowly, but I'm sick of it. He smiled at the girl, then turned back to her father. Would you mind telling me how you happened to find us? This is the most unlikely place on the planet. That's just the reason, said Nyland. When Lee didn't get back, I thought things over pretty carefully. At last I decided, knowing her as I did, to search the least likely places first. We tried the shores of the Fever Sea, and then the White Desert, and finally Idiot's Hills. We spotted the ruins of a shack, and on the debris was this chap, he indicated Oliver, remarking that 10 loonies make one half-wit. Well, the half-wit part sounded very much like a reference to my daughter, and we cruised about until the roar of your flame pistol attracted our attention. Lee pouted, then turned her serious gray eyes on Grant. Do you remember, she said softly, what I told you there in the jungle? I wouldn't even have mentioned that, he replied. I knew you were delirious. But perhaps I wasn't. Would companionship make it any easier to work out your year? I mean, if, for instance, you were to fly back with us to Junopolis and return with a wife? Lee, he said huskily, you know what a difference that would make? Though I can't understand why you'd ever dream of it. Wait, what's unnecessary? She's the one that proposed to him. Oh. Oh, yes. Her dad. Yeah, I saw that. Let's see. Lee, he said huskily, you know what a difference that would make, though I can't understand why you'd ever dream of it. It must, suggested Oliver, be the fever. That's actually the end of the story. So I apologize to everybody who arrived with the raid. We were very close to the end of the Mad Moon. So what did people think of it? Anybody who was here? I feel like it was really actually quite well developed. I know the past two stories were also this same author, and they were good. He's good writing. He's good at writing it. I do think it's one of a series of ones that he did featuring what did it call it? Alien ecologies. So they're one of the things he particularly specialized in his storytelling, and that was, not terribly prolific at the time, was highly developed alien cultures and giving aliens their own motivations that humans didn't necessarily understand. And so while we still encounter the stories through the perspective of a human, it's a human interacting with an alien culture and trying to understand it. And that culture is really well developed and very different from human. Like, apparently the loonies with their balloon heads and whatnot had built marble structures at some time in the past. Who's to say? His assumption is that they've devolved from that, but who knows? Probably because they're not like living in the city anymore, and they seem entirely motivated by getting candy from the humans. And the Slinkers are intelligent and build their own cities, but they're also rats with bat wing capes. And we don't really know their motivations. But they do metalworking, and like they have a full-on civilization, and they build cities and grow crops, and they don't talk in a way humans can understand. I could never quite tell if it wanted us to take it seriously or not. Based on the ending, definitely not. But also, I didn't hear all of it. Well, so it is definitely... It has its comedic elements. It's an adventure story. It's got the romance in it. The exasperation on the part of the human, which is where the comedy comes in. But ultimately, it is, being one of his alien ecology stories, it is one where the main purpose of it is to present a depiction of an alien culture. A depiction, like, let me go to the sci-fi, or the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction, because they described it on here. Beginning of his science fiction career, A Martian Odyssey for July 1934, broke new ground in attempting to envisage life on other worlds, in terms of strange and complex ecosystems with weird alien life forms. There was a first contact encounter in A Martian Odyssey. Told in Weinbaum's fluent style, it became immediately and permanently popular, having been reprinted dozens of times, and ranking only behind Asimov's Nightfall as the favorite example of early genre science fiction short fiction. It was followed by a less successful sequel, Valley of Dreams. Other stories in the vein include The Lotus Eaters, which we read, which was another presentation of an alien culture that was just baffling. Like, from an audience perspective, yeah, it was understandable. Like, we were able to sort of understand the alien motivations, but we also understood why it was so confusing to the humans involved in the story. I can't remember the details. I just remember how we reacted to it. Which features an interesting attempt to imagine the worldview of an intelligent plant. The Mad Moon, which we just read, Flight on Titan, and Parasite Planet. So this was kind of like, he wrote these stories in imagining life on other worlds and what it was like. But his particular style is slightly humorous. It reminds me a little bit of like the Mission Earth books by L. Ron Hubbard. Or honestly, it has a bit of the sort of like a hint of the sort of like exasperation in a comedic way that the Dungeon Crawler Carl novels have. Like, to quote, to cite a modern example, it's not entirely comedy, but it is humorous in the way that the main character reacts and is often exasperated and upset about things that he can't control. And rather than just accepting, hey, this is how the loonies are. This is how the slinkers are. He gets upset about it. And that's what makes it funny. That's where the humor comes in. It's not funny. But he overreacts, which makes it humorous. I would say it definitely, I think it stands up to the classification as classic. It is well put together. I think I don't know that there's anything particularly new that came from it and stuck around. Maybe somebody else would see something. I don't necessarily, but it's another stellar example of his exploration of alien worlds. I find it interesting that his Martian Odyssey was second only to Asimov's Nightfall. Nightfall is amazing. Although I don't know that I've ever actually read the short story. The novelization, the novel based on the short story, the Isaac Asimov and Robert Silverberg novel Nightfall is honestly one of my favorite science fiction books of all time. These Weinbaum short stories have been stellar. They're really good. Anywho, we are almost at the end of the list. The only one we have left is also in this issue of Astounding, and we'll read the little blurb on the table of contents page, but this will be the next one that we do next month. Actually, I don't know if it's going to be next month. It might be August before we get to it. Yeah, August 5th. Davy Jones' Ambassador. The descriptions of the aliens were fun. If someone wrote that today, it'd have a number of concerns, but I think it was basically well done. Yeah, I mean, there would probably be less acceptance for the way he described the loonies, with the numerous ways that he disparaged their level of intelligence and things like that. But overall, for it being 1935, they were well described. So yeah, next time when we get the final one on the list, it's going to be Davy Jones's Ambassador by Raymond Galloon. The submarine slid through the depths propelled by other power than its own. It slid between great doors and rested. The water receded. It was in a room. Apparently, we're going to go explore underwater, which kind of implied by the title referring to Davy Jones. But next week we actually have... Hello? We'll see how the credits do today, because I put in a heck of a lot of work on them. I'm annoyed that they didn't refresh properly, but as long as they're accurate, I'm good with that. Next week, the topic is orchidology. So I've got a collection about orchids, and we're going to look at that. See what we can learn about orchids. I have been your host, Rogan27, aka Anthony Wright de Hernandez. Hannah, it was good to have you here modding and apparently resubscribing, although the activity feed completely failed to pick that up. Thank you. 16-bit Eric, of course, thank you for the raid. And as always, we've been having some tunes by Lo-Fi Girl. Let's see where we may wish to raid. I generally pick one of two. Yeah, we're gonna go over to paleontologizing. I tried to raid paleontologizing on Saturday, and they had already ended. Unfortunately, the VTUL Studios channel is not able to raid paleontologizing. So let me see where I will raid with that one. Oh, yeah, that'll work. And we're going to do the split raid that we've done before. The VTUL Studios channel will be heading over to Monterey Bay Aquarium. They have their jellyfish cam, it looks like right now. And then everybody on the Rogan27 channel, it's going to be paleontologizing for day 2 of a dig. Danny Andusa is a lovely streamer who is an actual paleontologist, and they are, it says Montana Dinosaur Dig Day 2. So it should be good times. Thank you everybody for joining me today. Hopefully it was interesting. Hopefully I will see all of you again soon. Until I do, keep exploring history.